Hi, it's Melissa at the Oosterhout Free Library with a special edition of our Book Bite series. I have a particularly interesting book about the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a hero of the civil rights and peace movement. I picked it in part because it's written by his sister. You've probably studied him in school around this time because the Monday near his January 15th birthday is a federal holiday. It was proposed not too long after he was assassinated in 1968 and then was created in 1983. After the book, there are links to some great videos about the event we're talking about, the March on Washington, and the rest of his life, and some examples of the many books we have here on Dr. King. All of these books, including the one I'm reading, can be checked out by calling 570-823-0156 for no contact pickup, or to find out if the building is open to the public. You can browse our catalog online and download the Cloud Library app for free ebooks. Our book is March On, The Day My Brother Martin Changed the World, and it's by Christine King Ferris, Dr. King's sister, and it's published by Scholastic Press. And it starts with a picture of Dr. King's family. My brother Martin never bragged. Martin was always very modest. When we were growing up, Mother dear and Daddy taught us all, Martin, our little brother, Alfred Daniel, and me, Christine, to do good for others. They told us not to be chesty about doing right. Don't go sticking out your chest all puffed up and proud, Mother dear often said. Chesty is not the way to be. So, even though Martin got a lot of attention for protesting and for speaking out, he couldn't have imagined how many people would come to the Great March on Washington for jobs and freedom in 1963. But come they did. And this is one of the most famous episodes of Dr. King's life. But come they did, from northern cities like Detroit and Chicago, from southern cities such as Birmingham, Atlanta, and Memphis. They came from small towns, too, from places such as Danville, Virginia, and Albany, Georgia, and Orangeburg, South Carolina. Some of them rode the bus. Others came on the train. A bunch walked all the way from Brooklyn, more than 230 miles away. One man strapped on his skates and rolled into Washington, D.C. on that warm day, August 28, 1963. They all came to the Washington Monument just as the sun began its slow, hot dance across the sky. They came to hear Martin and other civil rights leaders inspire a nation. They came because they believed that all people should be treated equally. They came because they wanted to belong. They came in search for one thing, freedom. They came to march. Martin traveled to Washington, D.C. the night before he was to give his speech. He had come from Atlanta, Georgia, where our family lived. He checked into the Willard Hotel so that he could prepare his speech in a quiet place with no interruptions. My brother worked very hard on his speeches. He understood how important each and every one of his words would be. He wrote them, he scratched them out, and he wrote down some more. Martin practiced reading his speeches over and over again. He stayed up all night in his hotel room. Not once did he stop to eat or even lay his head down on his pillow for a quick nap. That was Martin. Even if he wanted to sleep, he couldn't. The words of his speech kept him awake. His speech wouldn't let him rest. Martin was still writing when the sun came up. He was still making changes and corrections to his speech. The hours had passed quickly. The time was rushing ahead very fast. Afternoon was not far off. Soon it would be time to deliver his speech. My brother always liked to put the final touches on his words before he spoke them publicly. So he read his speech quietly to make sure it conveyed the message he wanted his listeners to hear. Then Martin washed his face and changed into one of his best dark suits. Martin was a third-generation preacher. Our grandfather, the Reverend A.D. Williams, and our daddy, whose name was also Martin, had taught all of us King children many lessons about being an effective leader. They had told us to always be prepared with our best clothes when making public appearances. So, even though it was a hot summer day, Martin wore a clean starched shirt and a tie. He tucked his speech into his suit pocket. He was ready. Martin met up with the organizers of the march, some of the most respected civil rights leaders of the day: James Farmer, John Lewis, A. Philip Randolph, Bayard Rustin, Roy Wilkins, and Whitney Young. Together, they headed over to the Capitol to talk to a delegation from Congress about passing a law that would have black people treated the same as white people. While Martin met with the leaders, the marchers gathered at the foot of the Washington Monument, where they listened to great singers of the time sing freedom songs such as "Blowin' in the Wind" and "We Shall Overcome." This was how the march began. Once most of the people had come together, they started to march towards the Lincoln Memorial, where the day's most electrifying speakers and entertainers were gathered. There were students and poor people. Christians walked arm in arm with Jewish people. Black people held hands with white people. And even though they were from very different worlds, they were all marching for the same reason. Oh, it was a sight to see. I'd been to many marches with my brother Martin, but it was clear from the beginning that this one was special. Finally, someone rushed into the room where Martin and the other leaders were meeting. "Dr. King, Dr. King, look out of the window." Martin rubbed his eyes and peeked through the curtain. He could hardly believe what he saw. There was a blanket of people walking shoulder to shoulder. There were all kinds of folks, looking like patches of color in a great quilt spreading over the National Mall in Washington. There were thousands, chanting, wanting, ready, marching. Martin rushed out onto the Capitol steps. He and the other leaders hurried down to the street to join the marchers. You can see his wife, the activist Coretta Scott King. I always knew my brother was a powerful man, but when he and those other men walked together on that day, they were a mighty force. The sea of marchers parted from Martin and his friends. The marchers opened up to welcome these men who were paving their way. The 6 leaders smiled as they began to blaze the road to equality. Coretta, Martin's wife, who was always like a sister to me, was not far behind. Her heart swelled with pride. As Martin walked, he saw fathers carrying their children on their shoulders, waving and pointing, saying, "There's Reverend Martin Luther King." Grandmothers and grandfathers were dressed in their Sunday best, nodding and wishing Martin well. Their voices lifted praise into the heavens and filled the air with a joyful song. These are signs of counter-protesters, of racists who objected to the march. Martin didn't pay much attention to the police and the armed guards who had been sent from towns all over Maryland to keep order, and he wasn't worried either about the angry people who yelled and made mean faces and hurled hurtful words at him. Some people even hoped Martin and the marchers would be scared off, or that they'd get upset enough to say and do bad things back. They should have known this much. Martin didn't scare easily, and his marchers, who had always practiced non-violence, came to Washington, D.C. with love in their hearts, not hate. Peace was certainly what Martin had on his mind as he stood next to the marble statue of President Abraham Lincoln, where he spent most of the afternoon helping other speakers put the final touches on their speeches and shaking hands with people who had come too to make their voices heard. As a preacher, my brother knew how to influence a crowd. He knew that one of the best ways to get folks to listen was to present them with a good singer. Even though the day had been full of people singing freedom songs and putting their beliefs to music, Martin was especially pleased when he saw his friend, the legendary gospel singer Mahalia Jackson, had come to Washington on that day. Martin leaned towards Mahalia and whispered, "We need a song. Sing." And oh, she did sing. She let loose that old slave spiritual, "I've been rebuked, I've been scorned." That song was slow and sad but defiant. Just the kind of song Martin thought would help people remember why they had gathered on that hot summer day. Mahalia's magnificent alto rolled over the National Mall in Washington like soft thunder. The marchers were moved to shout, "Tell it like it is! Hallelujah!" When folks got to carrying on, Martin knew they were ready to receive his words. He stepped to the podium and looked out, taking in the precious sight of so many eager people staring back at him. As soon as Martin began to speak, he found a rhythm that was all his own. There was no stopping my brother. Soon he wasn't even looking at the words he'd labored over the night before. His speech took on a force all its own. He spoke with clarity and conviction. His friend Mahalia shouted to him, "Tell them about your dream, Martin." And he did. He used his words to paint a picture so vivid you could almost see the snow-capped mountains in Colorado, the slopes of California, the Stone Mountain of Georgia, and even the molehills of Mississippi that he described in his speech. He spoke of people of all colors, of all nations getting along, working together and praying together and standing up for freedom. Together in a beautiful symphony of brotherhood, he said. My brother Martin had a dream. He shared it with the marchers, he shared it with the nation and the world. It was a beautiful, inspirational dream. One day, he said, children would live in a nation where they would be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, where black boys and girls would be able to join hands with white boys and girls as sisters and brothers. And that's the most famous portion of the speech. Martin's words were as loud as thunder. When he spoke, I could feel myself filling with pride. Not the chesty pride that Mother dear and Daddy had always warned us against, but the kind of pride that comes from seeing your very own brother touch so many people in such a big way. And I could see the legacy of our family of ministers coming through Martin. For so many years I'd watched Martin preach, speaking from the pulpit, but today he was preaching to a nation. He was on fire. He was giving the kind of sermon that moves people to tears. To me, it felt like a holy revival meeting. My brother was making history. He was changing the world and reminding everyone that we're all God's children and all from a great nation that believes in liberty. And that is the only way for America to move forward. Free at last, thank God Almighty, we're free at last, Martin shouted. And that patchwork quilt of people who'd come from small towns and big cities clapped and cheered and let their tears flow. I couldn't hold my excitement. I knew something special had just happened. I was clasping my hands to my heart and smiling. I got chills listening to my brother speak. Mother dear and Daddy and Alfred Daniel and I knew a change was surely going to come. Martin and his dream had inspired people to help make that change happen. There was so much hope in Martin's speech. Hope for all of us. Hope for the whole world. On that day, my brother and all those who marched on Washington taught us all about the power of words and how important it is to work together and raise our voices to speak up. It is a day that will last in the hearts and memories of all Americans. That beautiful quilt of people, standing tall, taking a stand and making a difference. For you, for me, for all of us. There's more information about the march in the back of the book, and you can take this book out by making an appointment to come to the library or calling ahead and having it ready for no contact pickup. We have lots of other books about Dr. King, Coretta King, and the civil rights movement, both then and now, in the library. So give us a call.